Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Josh and Jeremy from Keystone Financial Services. Hopefully, you did really well over the weekend. We're doing an early call this time. We've been kind of shaking it up and trying some different times so we can accommodate different schedules along the way. But just glad that you're here. I know everybody's either signing in or has already signed in, so we'll wait a couple of minutes here for people to get situated. But in the meantime, we do have a questions feature. So along the way, Jeremy and Al have some opening comments with kind of what's going on, what we're seeing, our opinions and what we see going on in the economy and the markets and so forth. But also want to make sure that you have the opportunity. That's a huge part of this, right? Is that you have the opportunity to ask questions of us in a group format. So please note that in the GoToWebinar panel, there's a questions feature in there. So feel free to use that along the way. We will be going through a couple of different things. Certainly the last 5 weeks or so have been some of the most interesting 5 weeks, to say the least, of my career. I've been doing this for 21 years now as an advisor. And, of course, a lot of different markets, right? Going through the dot-com crash and 9/11 and the financial crisis, all kinds of different markets. This one will definitely go down as, I think, one of the most interesting. Not that my career's done anytime soon. I plan on going for a long time, but certainly it's been some interesting 5 weeks. I'm sure we would all agree. So, all right, it's the top of the hour right now, so we'll go ahead and get started. There may be some other people popping in along the way, but again, for those of you who just popped in right now, make sure that you use the questions feature. Jeremy will be moderating that, so we'll be able to take those questions along the way. And then we're going to start out with some opening comments. Again, just with some of our opinions, what we see happening in the markets. So let's go from there. We have a couple of things. First of all, Keystone Financial, we are a financial services firm here in Northern Colorado, although we have clients all over the country at this point. Even if we met here or met at a conference or something like that, people are mobile, right? They are kind of from all around the country. I'm just thinking from Washington State to Florida to New York City, kind of all over the country. So we're accustomed to this actually, the webinar format and doing virtual meetings. We're already fairly accustomed to doing this. It's just that we're doing them from our own homes right now, which is a little bit different, but definitely one that we're looking forward to getting back to the office and getting back in front of you face to face as well. In the meantime, I've been using a lot of virtual technology, Zoom and GoToMeeting. I'm sure a lot of you have been doing the same things. Now you'll see on the slide was the opening slide from our forecast presentation this year, which, we called it at the time, we called it ready for anything, right? But we didn't know that it would be this, right? We knew that there was going to be something, right? But we didn't know it would be quite like this. Certainly the volatility we're experiencing in the markets. Back then when we designed the presentation, of course, there was no, maybe a few people had heard of coronavirus back then. In fact, during one of our presentations, I think we had just heard about, hey, there's this virus coming out of China that could impact us. So who knew that it would become this, what we're experiencing right now. So a couple of things before we get started too far here. Again, Josh and Jeremy, we're both financial advisors, financial planners. What we tend to do is we tend to focus a lot on stuff that we can control rather than things that we can't control. So therefore, we focus on a lot of planning. We spend a lot of time with clients getting organized and going through scenarios, getting really situated, not just in the investment side of things, but very much so on cash flow and estate planning and tax planning, all kinds of different things that we can get involved in or at least incorporate into people's financial plans. So that's what gets us jazzed up, certainly as advisors. And we're excited to be able to talk to you today about what's going on in the market and in the world. But before we go on, this is the disclosure slide that the attorneys wrote, which tells you that this is basically just our opinions and nothing's guaranteed, right? I think most people will think that's pretty obvious, but certainly we want to make sure that everybody's aware of that this is just our opinions. We have no idea, clearly, after the last 6 weeks or so, we have no idea exactly what's going to happen in the market. And of course, we can't make any guarantees about investment values or losing money, gaining money, anything like that. So that being said, we're going to basically hit on a couple of main points today. One of those is the questions that we seem to be getting so much from clients outside of the presentation. We thought we would kind of lead off with those because it might actually be beneficial for everybody to hear those. Jeremy, actually, do you want to start on that? Some of the questions really have kind of surfaced around the stimulus money, right? There's these different pieces of stimulus that are coming out, both for individuals and for business owners as well. Jeremy, can you speak to that as far as kind of what we're hearing from clients, what questions we're hearing primarily?
Yeah, absolutely. Most of what we're hearing are questions and are in regards to a lot of the stimulus payments, mainly because people started getting them, I think. And so it's actually feeling like real money now. Um, and so I think a lot of the time, Josh and I spend our time taking complex ideas and putting them into kind of more layman's terms, so that we can help educate, the vast majority of people. Um, in this instance, I think there's a lot of confusion over exactly what these stimulus payments are. I think precisely because of that, and we've probably fallen for that as well. So we've heard things like, had questions on, is this a refund or is this a grant? Is this an advance on my refund? Is this going to impact my income? Do I have to pay it back, etc.? And so really what we have to do is kind of break it down, and I think the best way to do that is to kind of get into some actual tax terms. Doing so, I'm going to try to use anybody. Okay, so really what it comes down to is, in all reality, this is an advanced refundable tax credit. Okay, an advanced refundable tax credit. So what does that mean? Tax credits are not tax deductions. Okay, tax deductions serve to either reduce your taxable income or reduce your tax liability by a percentage. Okay. Tax credits, however, they work more on the back end of your taxes, where it is a dollar for dollar decrease of what you owe. In other words, your tax liability. So, for instance, if I end up owing the government $4,000 at the end of my taxes, and I have a $3,000 tax credit, that tax credit is going to eat all that up, and then I'm only going to owe them $1,000 back. Okay. Now, if the other important distinction is two types of tax credits. Okay, there's tax credits, a regular tax credit that just serves against your tax liability. So let's change up those numbers a little bit. If I owed $3,000 and I have a $4,000 regular tax credit, then it's basically that 4,000 tax credit is going to take down all $3,000 that I owe, but then there's $1,000 of credit left over. A typical tax credit just says, okay, we've taken you to zero. That's it. That's all the benefit you can get from this because you don't have any more liability. Okay. A refundable tax credit, however, works in the fact that if I owe $3,000 but I have a $4,000 refundable tax credit, then the first $3,000 works to reduce my tax liability to zero. So I don't owe anything. But then there's still $1,000 on the back end of that tax credit that's still there. What the IRS does is they say, okay, you've used $3,000 to reduce your tax liability. We're going to go ahead and refund you this $1,000 extra of this credit that you have. Okay. Now, the thing that sets this one aside, and it's different from anything else, is the fact that this is an advanced refundable tax credit. All right, so what does that mean? It means they basically said, okay, we're not going to wait until 2020 taxes because you people need this money now. And so they obviously don't know what our tax liabilities are going to be at the end of 2020. So they just said, for anybody who applies the $1,200 plus $500 per kid, etc., whatever that equals out to be, they say, here, this is what we figure based on your 2018 or 2019 taxes, and they send it to you in advance. Now, what does that mean for your taxes? One, this will not increase your taxable income. Okay, so it's not something that you're going to have to pay tax on at the end of the year. Two, this is not something that you are going to have to pay back. Okay, to call it an advanced refund, I would think is actually kind of a half truth. It's in all essence, it really is just a refundable tax credit. The only thing that sets it aside is that you already got paid out for it. So when tax time does come, that credit itself is not going to be available to you to reduce your tax liability at the end of 2020. Okay, it's already been spent. Like I said, it's not going to increase your income, and you don't need to pay it back. However, that credit is not available at the end of 2020. And so well, I think what we're trying to strive for as far as tax planning goes is don't be thinking that you have an extra tax credit at the end of 2020. So maybe you're, loading up on more distributions or something like that because you're betting on that being there. Okay. That is not the case. It's already been paid out. It's basically spent. Okay. So if we basically think about your taxes going forward as just a regular year and as if this never happened, then that's probably fine. The only other X factor right now that we don't know anything about is how states are going to treat this. All the rules everything I just talked about is from a federal level. States are widely left up to themselves to determine how they treat things like this. It is widely held that most states, if not all of them, are going to follow IRS guidelines on this as well and do pretty much the same thing. But that is yet to be seen. But that's a much, I think, smaller issue overall. So really, in essence, we've had a lot of questions about that. So without getting too far into the tax weeds, I hope that kind of clears it up. Basically, just remember that it's not there to increase your income. It's not something that you need to pay back, but it is a credit that has already been spent. So that credit itself is not going to be available at the end of 2020 to reduce your tax liability for 2020.
Great. Thank you, Jeremy. Yeah, and one thing to note too, of course, is we're not tax advisors. And so an extra asterisk on the presentation is make sure you talk to your tax advisor, right? As you can imagine, though, Jeremy and I, we're financial planners, and so we spend a lot of time understanding taxes and how it impacts our clients. So that's why we visit about that. The other thing that we're getting a lot of questions on is the PPP loans, and that would impact a lot of small business owners that, which, small business could be defined as, I think, 500 employees or less. So it could impact, companies that are actually pretty decently sized, all the way down to a hairdresser that's self-employed, right? That it's just them. So all of those would be in the mix, right? As far as being able to apply for those loans. Now, you might have heard this last week is that the money ran out, which was anticipated that the money would run out. There's a bill in Congress right now, which is being fast-tracked, hopefully will be passed here fairly soon, because really the whole point about all of this, when we think about the stimulus money that individuals are receiving, the PPP loans, the money that's going out to people and to businesses right now is to kind of make up for the fact that a lot of people are out of work, right? There's a lot of businesses that are shut down effectively. And if they're not shut down completely, their revenues are probably sharply reduced from what they once were. And so, that's one thing to keep in mind is that those PPP loans are really meant to bridge that gap for a 2-3 month period here where this economy has largely been put into a medically induced coma, right? We've done it to save lives, right? That certainly is the motivation behind all of it, is that there are a lot of lives that probably, would have been lost had this not been done. So the sacrifice that we're all making right now is for that, for a much greater good. Meanwhile, this has never been tried before, right? Just shutting down the world economy for any length of time really has never happened before, right? Probably the closest thing that I can think of is after 9/11, our economy, shut down for a very short amount of time, right? You couldn't fly, right? Planes were grounded. The stock market was closed temporarily. So it was a pretty crazy time frame, but things got going again and moved on. That's what's going to happen here sooner or later, right? That's the debate, right? Is how long is it going to take? And so the idea being that while a lot of businesses are being forced by the government to be shut down right now, the PPP loans are really there to pay companies not to lay off their employees, more or less. That's why the money is there. So what we're hoping right now is that with all the money that's being injected into the economy, which so far is in the trillions, right? We had a $2 trillion bill pass a few weeks ago, and there's probably more coming. Again, there's more money that's going to go to small businesses. There's a major infrastructure bill coming out too that's in the trillions of dollars. So that's one question that Jeremy and I are both getting a lot right now is why is the market so high? Why is the stock market so high, or why has it recovered so much from those lowest levels? Well, nobody knows for sure, right? But I think in large part it's because the Federal Reserve has been so active, right? In asset purchases, lowering interest rates to zero in a period of weeks, right? They've taken as much action and more than they had in months back in the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. So the Fed has been, very active. I think after this, certainly the Fed can't be blamed for not doing enough, right? They certainly have been very active and essentially saying to the point that, hey, we're not going to run out of money. This economy is not going to run out of money. The second part, of course, is going to be the fiscal stimulus, and that's going to come from the Congress and president, right? Passing various bills, and we'll see what ends up coming from here on out. But passing a $2 trillion bill certainly is a big chunk of money being injected back into the economy to bridge that gap. So the question coming up right now, I think, and in the news and the conferences and everything like that, people are wondering, well, gosh, I think we've already reached the peak, right? The experts have said that we've already kind of crested that peak of infections and in people passing away. We hope, right? We hope that we've seen the worst of it. So how do you get the economy going again? And how do you get the economy going in a way that not only do you get businesses going again, but you do it without having some huge resurgence of the virus, right? So various economies around the world, right, are trying that. Hong Kong and Taiwan, certainly are a couple of those, right, that are trying to get going again, and with some mixed success, right, as far as the virus coming back. So that's a big question mark right now. Certainly, I think there's a lot of uncertainty in the market, so we're going to continue to see tons of volatility going forward. That means hold on to your hat, right? It's not going to be an easy ride by any means, because even if everything opened up, let's say that there was a vaccine right now, and let's say that we just opened the economy back up and kind of let people do what they wanted to do. Well, people aren't going to just do that, right? Even in the best case scenario, people aren't just going to run out and start doing what they were doing before, right? There's a lot of money that's already been lost. I know a lot of clients that had travel plans, for example, cruises and travel all over the world. Think of events and concerts and Major League Baseball, all kinds of things, the Masters. Now, some of that may show up in the second half of the year. I was just reading that over the weekend, that it's going to be one heck of a fall, right? Assuming that things get going, but with regard to sports, right? We're going to have a lot of sports that have been pushed off. Some are gone for good, right? Like the NCAA basketball tournament, but other things, will end up coming back in the fall. So that's the big question mark right now. Certainly navigating waters that have not been navigated before, but there's trillions of dollars involved, and I think that's why the market is where it is that there's a large degree of confidence right now that on the government end of things, that they're doing what needs to be done to make things happen. Now, in the end, the questions come up as far as long-term implications are kind of unknowable right now. Some people are asking, well, when is this going to come to roost, right? Could this actually cause a much longer, prolonged recession in the long run, a really, really slow recovery from this in the long run because of the stimulus? Because when the government spends more money, that actually takes money out of the private sector in the long run, and that'll have to be paid back, right? There's a lot of debt that's being taken on right now that will have to be paid back. So that's one thing that's unknowable. We're certainly reading a lot of different economists that have different opinions right now. And I think the honest truth is that nobody knows, right, for sure. So staying diversified, staying with your asset allocation typically is always the best way in the long run. We know it's always been the best way to be able to navigate rough markets, is to stick with your plan, do some disciplined rebalancing. Certainly in a rough market, there's opportunities both for people who are still working. So one of those would be for folks that are still putting money into the market through 401ks, stock purchase plans, just into their normal investment accounts. Is it a buying opportunity? Probably, right? For somebody who has a long time horizon and they don't need the money anytime soon. Yeah, it probably is a great buying opportunity. The flip side, though, is for clients that say, but we're retired, right? How does that help us, right? This market is really rough and it's gone way down. The other side of it, and we've been getting a lot of client calls as well from people that say, you know what, stop my distributions. I don't want to take any money out, right? I'll just live off of my savings for a while, or just reduce what I'm taking out. because we're all at home, right? We're not traveling, we're not buying new cars, things like that. So we don't want to take as much money out of our investments. So that certainly can help as well by not having to sell stuff while it's cheap. So Jeremy, what questions do you have so far in the queue?
You know what? We actually don't right now.
Yeah, we're answering them really well. That's great. Couple other comments though, and certainly if anybody who wants to throw some questions in on the queue, a couple of other thoughts though, as far as questions we're getting. One of those is, what news should I pay attention to right now? Of course, the media is having a heyday with this whole thing, right? Because a lot of people are stuck at home. A lot of people are kind of glued to the media. In fact, maybe not so much right now as had been a few weeks ago, but a lot of people are kind of glued to the media. Well, how does the media make money? They sell ads, right? And so if they have a lot of eyeballs on those ads, that's a lot of extra revenue that they're generating. So keep in mind that we need to be gatekeepers of our own minds. That's really important to recognize that whatever we're consuming is probably going to dictate our mood and sometimes our actions, right? As far as how we end up behaving. So if we're glued to the media, which is overwhelmingly negative because they know that that's what gets people to watch, right? Is negative news. So a lot less positive news, even though there's plenty of it out there right now with advances on the virus and of course, stories about people that are heroes, right? That are really helping us navigate these waters. We're not hearing nearly as much of that as we are the negative stuff of the death count and infection count, things like that. So just be careful. It's not to say that you shouldn't be uninformed, but be careful about it. Certainly, trying to find some nonpartisan media is not easy these days, right? Most of the media tends to sway one way or the other. And, I think it also was fueling a lot of the panic that we saw a few weeks ago in the market, is the fact that there was just so much negative news and so much sensationalizing what was happening, both by the media and also by politicians. This is an election year, right? And so that's another major factor in this whole process, is that there's a lot of the motivation behind what's happening is, how are we positioning ourselves? This is the politicians, right? Not us. But how are we positioning ourselves for this fall if we're trying to get reelected or to be able to get elected, right? So a lot of posturing that's happening right now for sure. But do be careful about what media you're consuming. I would recommend that you try to stick with something that tries to be neutral at least. Wall Street Journal, CBS. Obviously, there's some partisan stuff on the right and the left that's obviously one way or the other. Well, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, right? Behind what's happening. But I think overwhelmingly, you'll notice that both the right and the left are overwhelmingly negative because they're there to sell ads. So just be really careful about that, about how much you're consuming, and recognize that in the end, there's never been a bear market that wasn't followed by a bull market. So we're up, 20% plus from the bottom right now, which technically I think means we're back in the bull market, right? I would not say that we're out of the woods. For people who are saying, well, we've already seen the worst of it, or things are safe now, right? It's safe to invest. I wouldn't necessarily say that. There's a lot of stuff that we don't know, and the market hates uncertainty. The market hates not knowing. So recognize that there's a lot of stuff that we don't know, and nobody knows. In fact, president doesn't know, the Fed chairman doesn't know. There's a lot of waters that are being navigated right now that we have not navigated before. So recognize that in the end, we're very confident that things will be fine in the end and we'll get through this. But I would not say that we're out of the woods. Definitely prepare for more turbulence and more volatility as we get through the next few months and see how this plays out. What else, Jeremy? Any other questions we've got?
We do not actually.
All right. Yeah, we've noticed the numbers coming down on these each week, which is great, right? It means that people are fairly calm right now. And I don't think anybody likes the situation that we're in right now. Certainly, this wasn't planned for, to be in a pandemic. But I think people are kind of settling into what's going on and recognizing that, hey, there is light at the end of the tunnel. We can kind of see the end of this and see that we're probably within weeks right now of businesses being able to start to reopen in various forms, right? My guess is that it's not going to look like it did before, right? There's going to be precautions that are taken even for the stores that are open right now. They've got hand sanitizer and strips of paint or tape on the floor saying stay 6 feet apart. Maybe they'll require us to wear masks. Who knows what'll end up happening? But I think we do kind of see that that's coming. Within a few weeks, things are going to start operating as normal. I can tell you, from a lot of the experts that we're paying attention to, the first time that the most of the big businesses right now, and certainly, businesses that have major dollars on the line, like professional sports, are not banking for things to start to feel safe or start to feel normal until at least July. So that's a ways out, right? That's definitely a ways out from right now. That doesn't mean that there won't be a progression towards that, but just recognize this is not something that's just going to turn on a dime. It is going to take time to get things going again. And certainly not just with the government allowing that, but again, consumers wanting to spend, the businesses wanting to spend. Did I see a question come through there, Jeremy? I thought I saw one pop through.
No, we had one from a client asking about specific days on stimulus checks,
Oh,
when they're something they had heard. I don't know, maybe you know this one, Josh. She had heard that it was on Tuesdays that there's sending them out. I've heard from family members that they've got them on Wednesdays and such like that. So I don't know if there is a specific day of the
I
week
don't
that the
know.
IRS
Yeah, that one
sends
I
out.
don't know.
Okay.
They're being direct deposited as long as the IRS has your direct deposit information, right? So if you've had tax refunds in the past, they will be direct deposited to your account.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a way, that was one question we had from a client this week, actually, that he said, well, I've never gotten a refund. I always plan for it that I have to pay in. So I don't think the IRS actually has my direct deposit information. True. So, physical check, that might be how you originally or eventually get it. But the other side of it too is that there is a way that you can sign in, and you can let us know offline if you don't have that link. We can get you that information as far as how to sign in to the IRS to give them that information for your direct deposit.
Mm-hmm. There's also, because I did read earlier today as well that because the IRS website was having so much traffic for that, that actually TurboTax came out with a thing on their website as well that does the exact same thing.
That's fantastic.
So that's another, resource as well for people if you don't know, or if you're even not sure if the IRS has your bank information to do a direct deposit. You can go on either of those websites. It's irs.gov or turbotax.com. And there are instructions on there of how to gain access to that and verify that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and hats off. That's a good example of companies that are just stepping up like crazy. Which, which more of that stuff was getting reported in the media, right? As far as examples of companies stepping up and in huge ways, right? Anywhere from tax prep companies like that to pharmaceutical companies to manufacturers to technology companies have just found ways to be extremely creative and resourceful to be able to respond to this quickly. So certainly hats off to all of you, especially those of you who are still working and out there. Chances are you probably have your hand in this somehow, right? Even if it's just helping your company navigate this, right? So there's less damage, to your company and certainly to society at large. Hats off to truck drivers, to healthcare workers. It was really cool. We saw the Thunderbirds fly over here this weekend, which they actually started. I think they started at the Air Force Academy, for the graduation, and then they actually came up to Greeley and went all the way down doing flyovers of all the hospitals. So very cool, and certainly for all of our clients that are healthcare workers, and we've got a number of them, nurses, doctors, and many of you have family members. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for certainly for serving and for keeping everybody safe. What else for questions? I see a couple pop through there, Jeremy.
Yeah, one specifically about hearing some things in the market again about a couple companies coming out with a cure or something of that nature, which is getting the stock market excited, and if we have heard anything about that.
Yeah, that's a good point, which we've touched on that on other calls. But kind of the end game of this is not just businesses getting up and running, but a lot of the fear is, but yeah, are we just going to see a resurgence of this? Or even if things die down over the summer, is it going to come back like the flu? Is it going to come back in the fall? And then we'll be doing this all over again next year, right? Could we take another hit like this, market wise and economically? So, certainly I think we're all hoping right now that a lot of the fast tracking that's happening with the vaccines, and there are a number of companies right now competing for to try to get there first, right? Try to get there first with the real vaccine that ends up being not only working but being able to be mass produced, right? So we can all get it and not have to do this again next year. And certainly, starting with the most vulnerable people that are the ones that have higher mortality rates right now. So yeah, and the government's actually providing some stimulus on that with the pharmaceutical companies with starting to produce those vaccines even before they're approved. In other words, so there will already be a supply of vaccine available for whichever one ends up winning now. Something will be available as quickly as possible. So certainly that's a big game changer. That's the ultimate game changer on this, is that we've got a real vaccine that prevents it going forward. But there's a lot of therapeutics that are being developed as well. Some that I think I can't remember how to pronounce it, but the one that they treat malaria with, right? It's a malaria plus the Z-Pack, which many of us have taken for antibiotics. There's combinations of those things that are being used right now, especially in New York City. And I don't think they have the time. Certainly, they don't have months and months of time where they can say they've done extensive studies, but what we're hearing right now is that some of those drug combos are effective, that they're effective with some people as far as being able to not only act as a preventative, but also be able to help people who are already, infected and in bad shape.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then actually Sherry chimed in here too, Sherry on our staff, saying that if you want to check the status of your stimulus payment, there's a link that she found on irs.gov that you can go and see where yours specifically is at if you haven't gotten it already.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So that's for individuals. For people who, if you think that you're eligible for the PPP loan, and again, for people who are self-employed, they are eligible for this. Let's say that it's a person who was a barber, hairdresser, something where they were just a solo person. Make sure that they know. If you've got family members or others, make sure that they know that they may be eligible for that. And again, even though technically the money ran out, it sounds like Congress is going to be extending some additional dollars in the hundreds of billions of dollars for some extras. And so those, you'd want to contact your local bank, or your bank typically would be your starting point there for how to actually apply for that.
Yeah, and in addition to that as well, if specifically, I know I have a lot of friends from way back in high school and such who are hairdressers or beauticians or something of that nature. And they are also available for unemployment loans, unemployment assistance. Self-employed people are not, but there is a provision that's out there. I haven't checked with on the state of Colorado website yet to see if those have become enacted as of yet, but I know they are working on it.
Great. Yeah. So, the one thing I can say about this too, that although none of us would have chosen this or planned for it, is that if you look through any difficult time, all the way back through the Great Depression, earlier than that, if you're a student of history and you dig into any really, really difficult time period, there's a ton of innovation that always comes out of it. So there are certainly some great stories that will end up coming out of this, and that's not to minimize at all loss of life or people who have gotten seriously ill because of this. But when there's a major challenge, that's one thing that, especially in America, and I think the world, right, but especially in America, we rise to the occasion, right? We step up and figure out, all right, well, we've got a major challenge. We've got to figure out how to do it and do it quick, right? So again, any kind of major time period, go through any of them, and there ends up being a lot of good things that come from it. Certainly, a lot of creativity, a lot of businesses that are born out of crises. And certainly, you can look to a lot of major companies that were born in the Great Depression back in the 30s, out of the financial crisis, out of 9/11. And even now, right, there are businesses being born right now to respond to what's going on and to be part of the solution. So again, just recognize there's a lot of good news out there. You just may not hear all of it. And certainly the ultimate good news that we want to be hearing is that there's a vaccine that's actually been effective. And it sounds like that's going to be bare minimum at this point. It's going to be available in the fall, probably a bit further out than that. But some reports that I'm reading are that they think they might actually be able to get something by the fall, which means that that could be a big game changer. I think ultimately that's what the market is looking for. So with that being in mind, then anything else, Jeremy, as far as questions or thoughts?
I do not see any other questions, Josh.
All right. Well, thank you all. Certainly, thank you for your confidence. Thanks for, thanks for giving up your time. Definitely like feedback, so feel free to email us individually, either at josh@keystonefinancial.com, jeremy@keystonefinancial.com. And certainly we are available, just so you know, we are available on a one-on-one basis. If you run across anybody, even if they're not a client, we're happy to visit with them, especially if it's a hardship situation or they've gone through a job loss or something like that. We're happy to talk through their situation with them and see how we can help. We can be a great resource too, right? Even if we can't help them directly, we know a lot of people that can help. So certainly we want to be there. Yeah, we want to be there to support them. But otherwise, just keep an eye out for future not podcasts. Yeah, we're coming out with one of those too. But keep an eye out for future webinars. We're going to be doing these weekly until things settle down, which I anticipate probably is going to go a little bit longer. We might start to space them out, just so you know. If things start to settle out and we feel like it would be more effective for you, we may space them out where they're just every other week or once a month, even at some point. So just keep an eye on your email and certainly invite anybody that you know. With that, I hope you have a wonderful day and a great week. And that's it. Thank you.
Take care.
Yep. Bye.